Historian Yuval Noah Harari is author of 2 sweeping studies of humankind, including the bestseller *Sapiens*, and his latest is called *Homo Deus*, A Brief History of Tomorrow. And he joins us now for 10 questions on the haphazard history of human happiness. Nice to have you here at TVO with us.
Hello.
Did evolution design us to be happy? That's question 1.
No, definitely not. Evolution does not care at all about happiness and suffering. It only cares about survival and reproduction. And it uses happiness and suffering as goads to make animals survive and reproduce, but that's all.
Question 2, the agrarian revolution. Did that make us happier?
Depends who us are. It made a small elite of kings and philosophers and priests happier, but for the vast majority of the population, life actually became worse. Life as the average peasant in ancient Egypt was much harder than life as a hunter-gatherer 10, 20,000 years earlier.
In which case, let's try question 3, the Industrial Revolution. Fridges, cars, cell phones, the modern world, did that make us happier?
Again, depends on who are you focusing on. In general, it was more beneficial to the average person. For the first time in history, most people were free of famine. For the first time in history, most people became free of plagues and epidemics. And for the first time in history, most people became free of war and large-scale violence. So in this sense, the Industrial Revolution did benefit the vast majority of humankind.
Question 4, the gross domestic product of a country and the happiness of its citizens. What's the relationship between the two?
Up to a point, there is a good correlation. But once you move beyond a certain level of wealth, of average GDP per person, it becomes far less important. And additions to making the country or the people wealthier does not make them happier at all.
Question 5, the pursuit of happiness. We know it's an important thing. It's enshrined in the American Constitution. Do we really know, though, in your view, what makes us happy?
No, definitely not. After thousands of years of research and experiments and so forth, humankind seems to be as ignorant about the real sources of happiness and suffering as it was 40,000 years ago.
I know what would make me happy. A Stanley Cup for the Maple Leafs in my lifetime, but we'll see about that. Question 6, a farmer in the 19th century may not have been too concerned with happiness. 100 years from now, do you think we will still care about being happy?
Again, the question is who are we? 100 years from now, it's quite likely that humans like you and me will disappear and Earth will be populated by a very different kind of beings, all kinds of cyborgs and AIs and so forth, and it is extremely difficult to predict what kind of emotional or mental life such beings, such entities will have.
Question 7, is happiness overrated?
No, I think it's underrated, and I basically think it's misunderstood. I mean, it's all too often equated with pleasure, and when you equate happiness with pleasure, then there is good sense to underrate it. I mean, why go into so much trouble and all of life just in order to have a few fleeting moments of pleasure? If you equate happiness with pleasure, then no, it's not so important. But I think that happiness goes much deeper than pleasure.
For Buddhists, quote, all suffering arises from desire. Does the desire for happiness, ironically, create the opposite effect, unhappiness?
If you just dream about it and desire it, and you don't understand how to get there, so yes, obviously, any desire which is not fulfilled is a deep source for dissatisfaction.
Not many, question 9, not many historians write about happiness, but you do. How come?
I think it's the most important subject in history. I mean, when you come to evaluate historical events, the bottom line for me is whether they made people and other animals happier or more miserable than before. Otherwise, I don't see any way in which you can evaluate and judge whether the development, the event, was beneficial or not. And if you don't understand what happiness is and what suffering is, then you don't really have a chance of evaluating historical processes correctly.
And finally, question 10, what is the one thing that makes you the happiest?
Understanding the truth. I think that the real key to happiness is to understand the truth about yourself and about reality. Somebody who really knows who he is and what is my place and what is reality, such a person, I think, is really happy. And such a person is really at least on the way to being liberated from suffering and from misery.
I'd still take a Maple Leaf Stanley Cup over that, but anyway, that's just me. That's our 10 questions for Yuval Noah Harari, author most recently of Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. Toda rabah.
Thank you.